had to like look it up, and it's basically the show business name for like a sensory quiet space. But famous people call it the green room. So we had a
Oh,
green room this year.
that's great.
Yeah.
That's so needed.
Yeah. Well, like we had our sensory friendly quiet room. We just weren't calling it the green room, but
That's
we renamed
right.
it now. We're extra showbiz.
Or the nurturing space.
Yeah. And I have my Saundry shirt on,
It's beautiful.
which I never usually do for these events, but I thought, why not today?
Of course.
Yeah,
It's the place to have it on.
exactly. And the colors match the name.
They do.
That's done on purpose. That's Saundry branding.
That's planning.
Welcome everyone to today's event. I'm going to take a moment to create some extra time for people who are joining a little bit late. So please do bear with us. We are going to allow an extra 30 seconds to 1 minute to allow people to join. All right, I'm going to go ahead. Welcome to today's event, everybody. My name is Rebecca Devlin. I'm a training and development specialist at Saundry. We're so incredibly pleased to have such a large audience with us today. We launched this incredibly exciting free virtual series to explore diverse topics, allowing event participants to expand their own understanding and stay on top of the latest research to build their resource toolbox. Today, we'll be discussing ways to build inclusive classrooms, embracing diversity and connections. I would like to begin by introducing our first speaker, Julie Nadeau. Julie is an occupational therapist and a certified teacher with over 20 years of experience in inclusive education. She works within a school board to build support team capacity and also mentors other occupational therapists. As a parent of an autistic daughter, Julie brings an incredibly unique perspective shaped by her neurodivergence and Indigenous heritage. Julie, we're thrilled to have you join us here today, and we really look forward to you sharing your insights on fostering inclusive environments and the importance of relationships in supporting all learners.
Thank you, Rebecca.
Very, very welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm humbled to be here. Thanks.
Our pleasure. Julie is joined by Bruce Nadeau. Bruce is a self-advocate, father, and public servant with a diverse journey shaped by ADHD, physical disabilities, and personal growth. With experience in healthcare and human resources, Bruce's work reflects his deep understanding of mental health, sexual orientation, and various forms of diversity. Bruce, we're incredibly grateful to have you with us today. And we really look forward to hearing your personal journey and insights on navigating various forms of diversity, as well as your experience with inclusion in education. So you're both incredibly welcome. We're incredibly happy to have you here today. You're very, very welcome. Before we start, I did want to mention one thing, if that's okay. Please note that today's session is recorded and it will be made available to our audience. We encourage all of our participants here today to use our comment section to ask any questions that you may have. So yeah, feel free to drop any questions that you have. We will have an opportunity at the end to answer questions during a Q&A period. The duration of this event is going to be slightly shorter than what was originally advertised. We are incredibly mindful of the participants that are here today, your time, your schedules, and we did decide to reduce the time to 30 minutes of talking followed by a Q&A. So we'll wrap up in approximately 45 minutes just to ensure that everyone has time to grab a bite to eat for lunch if you're taking this particular webinar over your lunch period. So without further ado, let's get talking about today's topic, which is inclusion and promoting inclusion in the classroom. The topic itself of inclusion we know is incredibly broad with many definitions out there. And I would like to open the conversation, if it's okay with you, Julie, to ask, what does inclusion mean to you?
Thank you, Rebecca. And I want to say I really hope everyone joining us has their lunch with them and they can actually eat and listen. And we know they sharing this time with us is so precious. I know they don't get a lot of time off. And so I'm grateful that everyone is able to be with us. And you're right. The definition of inclusion is so broad. And I want to say that our definitions are shaped by our views of the world and all the roles we carry. So I do bring unique perspectives because of my journey. And to me, inclusion is more a way of being. It's a feeling, and it's something that you get to share with your learners, no matter what age level they're coming to you from. And it's not really things you do. It's not just that. And it's not physical things that you're going to do to your classroom, maybe a tiny element, but it's really a way of being. And it's sharing acceptance from the beginning, from those first encounters, even before when you're seeing, your class list and the needs identified. If you take a minute and you really think back, you're going to notice right away that your views are informing already your opinion. So it's a way of being and sharing that acceptance. To me, that's what inclusion is really about.
I love how you described it, and really the emphasis on the feeling part kind of jumped out to me. As someone who's worked in the field for many, many years, I always used it as a kind of a guide. I'd ask myself, how is this kiddo feeling? Do they feel understood? Do they feel accepted? Did I do my due diligence to kind of dig deeper and better understand that student, so that they would have that feeling and experience with me in my classroom? In terms of relationships, I wanted to ask you, if at all, the importance of relationship building when trying to create inclusive environments or promote inclusion.
I think if you're not looking at the relationship, then you have no inclusion, and you won't have it. I think without a relationship, you're unable to set the stage for learning. Really, it's that essential, right? The bond that you're going to develop with the student, showing that acceptance as they are, the willingness to see the world from their perspective. And when they share that perspective with you, you believe them. You believe their version of the world. And you're willing, right? Like that relationship is like you're willing to get to know their special interests and what informs their views. I honestly think if you put all of your effort into just building the relationship, you will be golden. As an educator, you absolutely will be. There's sometimes, right, some power imbalances that can come in when we look at links between teachers and students. And I think if your relationship with the student is genuine and it comes from a good place when you're looking at the lens of inclusion, then you will overcome that and you won't fall into some of, sometimes even those unconscious biases that can inform our way of seeing students. So relationships are key. You cannot go around that.
Right.
Your experience in the classroom will definitely reflect it if you do.
So it's definitely worth time, investing some time and kind of nurturing and fostering those relationships. It almost sounds like crucial from a foundational perspective almost.
Absolutely.
When you think of that. Bruce, I wanted to kind of ask you if you had any personal experiences or a relationship with an educator or some sort of an inspiring relationship that helped you in the past or shaped your experience in any way.
Yeah, I've had a few inspiring relationships with educators in my childhood, and they just took me under their umbrella. They were just natural, they were themselves. And I always look back at that and see those educators as dedicated educators,
Mhm.
people that had it in them, people
Yeah,
that I didn't have to explain who I was or how different I was or how my
right.
needs were. They just knew it, they felt it, and took me under their umbrella. They built that like soothing comfort trust
Yeah,
zones, just made me feel
yeah,
very like, like not needy compared to all
yeah,
the other kids.
yeah.
So
And
yeah.
I'm hearing the word feel again. So it's about you remember, people remember how they felt, how a person made you felt. You felt accepted, you felt understood. And I'm hearing that you felt safe based on what you said, the sensory experience that you had. A term that you had introduced to me in the recently, Julie, is sensory culture. And that was new for me. I've heard sensory diets and sensory processing and sensory integration, but I hadn't
Yes.
really come across this term.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
hearing Bruce even talking about the sensory piece and what he recalls from that relationship component, I wondered if we could, define sensory culture and the impact it has on our students in the
Absolutely.
education setting.
And sensory cultures and sensory lifestyle is not my own invention. This is some research done by Dr. Miller. Oh goodness, many many years ago, I came to meet with her, and that was something first, early 2000s, very new, kind of introduced this concept. But sensory culture is about bringing in to your everyday ways and methods to meet sensory needs. So in schools, we often hear about special sensory rooms and sensory equipment and sensory diets and schedules, and it's complex, right? And you need special training, and boy, that can be overwhelming for an educator.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you look at it from a different perspective and you say, this has got to be part of our life, like it's got to be our everyday. How do we bring this in? So sensory culture for me in a school is about bringing it in to the classroom. What can we do? This is where it's not just a feel, but you'd be taking some action. What can you bring in and just blend in to
Mm-hmm.
your everyday,
Yeah.
that you're not going to feel like you're going above, like, oh, it's that time, I've got to go do this. If it's just there, it's accessible. And I can give you tons of examples, like, are we going to put flexible seating options in the room? Will there be zones where there's less movement around the students, like a more quiet kind of nurturing space even to retreat to
Mm-hmm.
when it feels very overwhelming? Can we have textures? Even custodians love this one, but textures under the desks or under the chairs, like different feely things that we can even just discreetly touch with our hands. So
Yeah.
it's not a fidget that you're physically seeing and someone's playing with, but
Mm-hmm.
it's something quite discreet. Even that blends in so well for older learners too, right?
Yeah.
Are snacks available
Mm-hmm.
throughout the day? And are you mindful of the snack options you might be presenting or encouraging,
Mm-hmm.
right? Simple things like even the water that you might be drinking, like, is it in a bottle with a sport spout? Is there a straw? Then you're getting more deep pressure right through the jaw. I could easily talk to you so much about the ways that we can do this,
Mm-hmm.
but tiny little things like this is what matters. This is what we can really do, right?
Right.
You're trying to get to the curriculum and all these expectations on you as a teacher, like, oh my goodness, one more, like, I don't want it to feel like one more thing.
Mm-hmm.
If I'm going to try to help you show full acceptance, then it's going to need to be simplified, right? I don't want you to see the student coming in with some unmet sensory needs as something else that you've got to
Yeah.
be on top of, or right. So how can we blend it in? Is there, even in your teaching approaches, like, are there options for movement as you're you're teaching, right? And the assessment methods, like there's so many things,
Yeah.
even classroom level, and then you can think, right, school level.
Yeah.
This applies to staff. Like imagine if we're mindful of sensory culture even for our teachers in the staff room,
Yeah.
staff meetings, assemblies, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's not just the kiddos that we're teaching and supporting.
No,
And
it's
it
not.
sounds like the sky's the limit in terms of different approaches that you can take. And a lot of the actions that you said, they can be proactive. So you can kind of do them in advance based on what you're seeing.
That's right.
To kind of set
That's
yourself
right.
and the student up for success. I did have a question though. Do I need to be an occupational therapist to do this? Or do I need to have an OT consult? Or can I just look at my environment, do my research, attend these webinars and make like little adjustments myself to make the environment that bit more inclusive?
That's right. And I think it's always a beautiful experience to get to work with a team. I rarely work on my own. I always work part of a team. But a lot of sensory culture and lifestyle concepts are made to be just that anyone can do this, right? We have to think even beyond the classroom when our students are home. Like they don't have the fancy equipment either. And we've got to blend this in. Like how do we blend it in? So no, you don't necessarily need that, that consultation. I know in occupational therapy, it is quite, the holistic view of the person and blending in that person's needs, the occupations, the demands you're putting on them, and then the environment.
Right.
But the little things that you can start with, everything we've discussed now, it's just meant to be part of every day. So even presenting frozen snacks, like who would know, right?
Yeah.
But frozen fruit just being some deep pressure for our jaw and the calm of the cold. Like there's so many tiny things. I hope that we can, I know today we're limited and we're just touching on this, but that further learning, I can evoke that little bit of curiosity in you perhaps, and then you might dig a little deeper and look into some more resources. But just this is becoming, I feel, with all the demands, even on an educator, like we have to think a little smarter about how we're going to do this, right?
Yeah.
And presenting movement.
Just knowing that, sensory culture is a thing. It's not going to go anywhere. And there are many big and little changes that can be made that will improve the overall experience.
Absolutely.
And promote that inclusion.
I wonder about our advocate as well, if they've had some experiences with sensory culture, right, in their time in school. Bruce, how do you see that?
A few teachers would let me work standing up or go lay down in the back of the class on the gym mats. Some got really bothered by it, and one that I've maintained throughout the years and throughout my multiple professional endeavors was the exercise ball, and I still have an exercise ball to work on. I have that in the workplace. We have stationary bikes and treadmills where we can just plug in the laptop and work there with controlled speeds and stuff. And to me, it's just sensory culture is a big thing, and it's there to stay for sure.
Well, that's amazing. And I love how even you've taken some of those strategies that were shared with you many years ago in the education setting, and there's still something that you practice to this day in your workplace. To me, that speaks volumes in terms of the impact that small, minor, little accommodation made to you, Bruce. So thanks for sharing that.
Yeah.
Talking about all of the amazing things that we can do, big and small, I know that, when we're trying and we're striving to promote inclusion and improve our inclusionary practice, it's not without its obstacles if we're to be truly honest in this conversation. But I did want to ask you, Julie, when you're consulting with and working with educators, what do you share, or any tips for turning those obstacles into meaningful learning opportunities?
Absolutely. I always encourage them first to always look within, right? What that obstacle that you're facing right now, how do you feel about it, right? Like, how does it make you feel? Because often that will be the roadmap to kind of let us know where do we need to start. So some obstacles will present themselves and you have the resilience to overcome them. And you're like, it's not a big deal. I can do this. But at times that obstacle is telling you something and you've got to take it as a learning moment. You're on a learning journey along with that student, every student. It's not because you've supported one neurodiverse student or one student with emotional needs that currently you're good. No, you're going to be on that journey with them, and there will be learning moments that arise for you. Are you going to always recognize them? Are you going to try to say it's the system, it's how it's built? Perhaps, but I think if you allow yourself that honest and brave conversation internally, even within yourself, and you reflect on your practices, you might see that there is room, right? There is room for change. Sometimes everyone wants to transform into a different version of themselves, but change can be challenging. So I think that's often how I approach those obstacles. I definitely would love, I know I'm chatty, as you can tell, but I would love to tell you so much more. But in essence, I would say using, what those obstacles are trying to tell you in terms of learning for yourself and the student. What can we do? And there's always, when you start looking, you'd be surprised at the number of people you could mobilize to come support you, and often at no cost, right? We do have some good public services that support school teams, but it's to show that vulnerability initially and to say, I need to learn about this, right? And not to yourself, and to also express that to that student, their families, bringing them in, right? Like, I will learn about this. It's important to me. And when you really show that acceptance to, initially with your student, all of this is not going to feel like work. You're going to want to do this.
Yeah. I find that message very empowering, Julie, because sometimes when we face an obstacle, like you said, you may not feel like you have that resilience within you. You might feel a little bit stuck. But with any learning journey, no matter what you're learning, whether it's, you're learning to better support a kiddo in your class or anything in life, that reflective piece is so important, often not the easiest. I almost feel like I would love a template to create for educators to help in that moment, to kind of coach them through that reflective piece, to kind of help with that learning. But it brings the empowerment piece to me, is it gives the power back to the educator to learn, to grow, and then to for it to be a meaningful experience for them too. Something else you said there. Oh, I think I lost it.
That's okay. It might come back.
It might come back, exactly. But yeah, we were talking about obstacles. I know that we do have a lot of educators always striving to learn and improve their practices. And it takes me to another term that is quite popular right now, which is inclusion champion. I do have a pretty decent understanding of what the term is, but for anyone not familiar with that term today, would either of you like to share your understanding of the term inclusive champion?
I certainly don't mind starting. I feel an inclusion champion. I've had the pleasure of meeting so many, and some in the becoming stages as well. I think it's important to reflect on this because we all have a story, and the story will inform our approach, right, and guide us. And the champions I see are the genuine educators that are willing to be brave and to express that vulnerability early on, right? Not pretend, even if they're veteran teachers. They're not saying, of course, yes, I can do this. Like, yep, no problem. We've got it under control. No, really saying every experience is unique and I'm going to learn with you. They're genuine. There's passion. There's passion to support those children in their care. They value diversity. They're not really afraid. to dig into it, no matter the knowledge base they have. They give themselves grace to learn as well and to evolve. I see that a lot. They can, and they're often pretty good pros at regulating their own nervous systems and, or just, creating within them a safe haven for other students to lean into. And that applies to everyone in the room, right? I think they express that safety with their presence, and they're predictable. Their responses are predictable for the students. I feel that they easily adapt and bridge in movement into their day for themselves and their learners. They often just master blending in and hiding recommendations from all the large teams that often support their learners. There's so many recommendations, right? OT, SLP, speech therapy, occupational therapy, and physio. Like, everybody is giving them recommendations. You've got often mental health school teams. Like, it's a lot. And they take it all and they roadmap that. And they're like, how will I blend this in? I'm just, I don't want my student to feel like they're being removed for this and removed for that. They just bridge it all together. And then their room, the setting, often they're able to be mindful of visual distractions and, what are the acoustics like in my classroom? They just have that little radar, that awareness oftentimes that they perhaps were not born with, but they're receptive to acquiring it. So those are often my champions, and I call them champions. I've probably said this before in conversation, Rebecca, but I relate it often to like my Hall of Fame for inclusion, right? Like, who would I see up there? And these champions would be part of it. But I wonder, Bruce, what do you have some gems of, champions you remember?
Thank God I had a few special ones throughout my learning path, and they just had that gift in them to make you feel normal, even though you were a special need, physical, mental, or whatever. They just made you blend in the rest of the group, and your needs were nowhere to be seen, but you were heard, but like silently heard. They just take you under their wing, and you were part of the group, So for me, that was my champions. And I mean, I remember their names and everything from all those years, and I'm like, wow, like, they were really special teachers. They never made me feel a kid with special needs. So for me, that meant the world and just made the learning path so much easier.
Yeah, that's so powerful. And two things jump out at me. One is, Bruce, you call it a gift, and I hope
It is.
these past people, I hope if you ever cross paths with them or you're in contact, they understand just how gifted you saw them as, because that's really, really special. And then, Julie, it stood out to me that all of the qualities and the actions and the strategies that you mentioned, they can be learned. Just like you said, if people are open and they're reflective and they're open to receiving and learning, we all have the capacity, which to me is a very inspiring takeaway from this webinar, to be inclusion champions. And one day I hope I make the Inclusion Hall of Fame, and I'm sure we're all aspiring for that. So thank you both so much for sharing that. We are coming very close to the end of today's webinar, and I wish I could continue this conversation because you're both so knowledgeable and inspiring. I'm enjoying this so much. I did want to ask if either of you had any advice or any tips for educators that you just don't want this webinar to leave or to end, for any educators who are trying to make a lasting impact on inclusion in their class or school at all.
I would say, if I can jump in, that they always remain hopeful. They keep hope, and their hope will keep them going, and it will bring action if they can remain in that zone, right, for themselves. I think they have to imagine the differences that they're making. I know they hear it all the time, but it's really magical when you unlock that feeling in your learner, right? Like Bruce shared, it's very magical and it will stay with them forever. So you're going to be the leader as the teacher for this process to unfold pretty magically. And you're going to see it. You're going to see that glimmer even years later. When they speak of it, you'll see it in their eyes. Even your nonverbal students, I know that you will see the glimmer if you just look. If you look for, and you're open to seeing it. So
I know
would
that
want,
glimmer. I like it.
I love it. And I see it in their eyes. I see it. I would not want anyone to leave not being reminded of that.
Yeah. That's beautiful. Thank you so much, Julie. And also, I know you had mentioned a lot of educators know. In my experience, a lot of educators don't always know. So sometimes you're striving and you're looking for the glimmer and you see it, but you don't always get the feedback that you're doing a fantastic job. But just knowing that if you're showing up every single day and like you said, an open heart with the best of intentions and you're striving for that, you're doing a fantastic job. Pat yourself on the back.
Absolutely. And give yourself a calming hug. But I think it's and remember who you're truly working for. You're working for the students. You're working for the learner. That's how you measure the magic you bring and how you're going to change them. Don't think of, oh, I'm sure some administrators won't like hearing this, but don't think of all that, right? Don't think of the student. Are you really making that difference? Are you making them feel
the feeling
welcomed and safe, and it's okay to be themselves just by being around you? Imagine that. Imagine how powerful that is.
Right?
Right? So that's more important, I think, many, many, many times when you're looking and measuring your achievements. I want you to think of that much more than any of the other benchmarks and things that educators are subject to.
That's amazing. Bruce, any tips or strategies or parting message you would like to leave with today? Or
gosh, we've said so many nice things. I would say
capture a lot.
if I would have to be an educator nowadays, I know it is a very, very difficult society with all the IT stuff that's jumping in and how the kids are like hypnotized by all the equipments and raised by screens. Sometimes just like taking a student by the hand and sitting down 2 minutes with him and looking at him deeply in the eyes and asking him, what can I do to make things better for you so you feel normal like all the other kids? What would it be? Sometimes I remember, and I remember sometimes like my fifth grade teacher would literally take recess and would grab me by the hand and hold me like if I was her son. And we'd just go for a little walk in the hallway or around the schoolyard. And she'd just like bring the best out of me and without not even doing nothing special, just being her, being open to hearing and not just listening to reply. That would make a big difference.
Okay, that's huge. Thank you so much for sharing that, Bruce. I'm having a look here at the Q&A section. If you guys are okay to just move over to a quick question before we wrap up today. But there is a specific question from Kim, and thank you so much, Kim, for submitting a question. Kim mentioned that she has a student in her class, and she is finding that there's some challenge around including that kiddo in playtime. So it's really specific to play, but just very generally, if you have any recommendations around how she can make that student feel more comfortable to engage in play with other students.
There's so much, right? They could be in terms of barriers, which we don't fully know, Kim, and I'll try to give you some learning areas to explore perhaps within your team, but do we have even some sensory needs in regards to proximity to others, which play at times can involve proximity. It can involve noise, which perhaps if your student is struggling with some neurodiversity elements that could potentially be a limiting factor. So some sensory needs, again, with the level of noise, right? So how can we select the activities for play and break a few of those barriers, even communication barriers often in play? And we often focus on the student that we are trying to include in the play, but what about the peers? Do we give them some coaching? Do we support them to help bridge those barriers? Example, if your student is communicates with picture symbols, are the peers comfortable using that? Can we create quiet sensory play opportunities that are maybe more parallel in nature and not requiring some interactions directly with the peers, right? I think play is like the most important thing for a child. Everything is through play. How can we bridge that? Is this child, your little kiddo, someone that loves the imagination and they have these characters? Can we bring peers into that and do some role playing, or right? Oh, Kim, I wish that we worked close together. Love to come in for one of these consults.
That was a great question, Kim. And I know you have so much to offer in terms of answering that question, but we're limited by time, unfortunately. But thank you for trying, Julie, even with that limited information with regards to that student. I appreciate it. We don't have a lot of other questions in the Q&A at this time. So if there was anything else that you guys would like to include in the webinar, or if not, I would...
I'd love to tell you a story about an educator, if you don't mind.
I would love the story.
So I recall a teacher, and I want to say I want to share this story because it was a veteran teacher, a teacher that I would never have hesitated for a moment to bring this student and include them in her room. So the integration in the room was going to happen, but the inclusion, right? Very different. The teacher was uncomfortable with the nature of the needs. So neurodiverse learner, a lot of emotional needs, history of lots of trauma. Little person is coming, doesn't want to come, but comes with barriers to inclusion, aggression, elopement. I mean, daily emergency services being called. I could see the fear on the educator's face, on the administrator's face in that building. I mean, this was a lot. And I want to share this because I want to show you how hard it was for even seasoned people, because I don't want to make this seem like it's so simple, right? It took time. It took a willingness to be vulnerable and to say, at the heart of all this, it wasn't like, I don't want this student in my class, or at the heart of it, it was really knowledge, even for a veteran teacher who in her training didn't receive all of, the like trauma sensitive practices and how to blend in sensory culture so that we're not putting a staff member alone in a sensory room, perhaps with a student who would monopolize that sensory space. He would need to stay there so much. It was like, how do we blend this all in? She would be in my Hall of Fame, where I would list all of my champion educators, because she felt that we created, the school team around her, we created a brave enough space. Safety was felt, and she could be vulnerable and share this. So when she saw the barriers and self-reflected and identified how she felt about those barriers, it launched her into this quest for knowledge through us. She trusted us.
Yes.
Much like we ask the student to trust the educators and launch into learning, she had to do it first, and she did. And it was marvelous to see the end result. Marvelous, I tell you. I wish Miss Kay will say, and Jay, like, wow, how amazing to see further down the process when I would come and check in. There's some classrooms where you're tiptoeing towards and you're like, ooh. And I knocked and I'm like, so how, it's so quiet today. Like, so Jay's absent. And it was like, oh no, he's here. He's doing like his independent work. And I'm wow, like just star practices
Right.
all around, right? I
Yeah.
want to share this because anyone at any stage in their career can benefit from really looking deep and being honest. And the relationship that was built between those two is strong, is very strong.
Yeah.
Once we identified the barriers and true acceptance came, I mean, his link with his education team is probably the healthiest relationships this child's ever experienced, right?
Wow, that's a very inspiring story, and I really appreciate you sharing that story. And yeah, I guess it speaks to it's not just new teachers coming out of Teachers College that sometimes need that support and that brave space and the opportunity to reflect and grow and improve practices, but that whole story, including the outside support that came in for that particular teacher, and to hear of the positive bond that was developed and continues to be nurtured, is everything that we talk about when we talk about inclusion. So thank you for sharing that. We did have another question that came in, if it's okay to
absolutely
a minute or so. I think we should. This particular question comes in from a lady who shared that she has a student that when she takes them to the sensory room, sometimes they don't like it there per se. They'd rather be in the classroom instead. Is there any advice that you would give in a situation like that?
Absolutely. I think if we can, perhaps the time in the sensory space has been prescribed by a therapist, and there's a strict sensory diet to carry out in that space. Perhaps that's the case. It might be time for a revision of the needs. Sensory needs evolve. They evolve if there's a change within the person, if there's a change on the demands on the person, on the student in that school setting, if there's a change in staff or even the environment. So there has to be some elements, right, contributing. Then the other is possibly social awareness, that I don't want to step out and be my kind of complex learner needs be exposed. Like, I don't know, right? I can't get to chat with Nadine directly right now, but what a nice conversation to open up with her team, right, at school. I think it's enlightening what we can actually achieve and reproduce in a classroom with very little, even in hallways, in transitions, right, that we just blend it in so it doesn't show so much, and you often can achieve the same results. But it's a conversation to kind of show the courage to have and to bring up, right, with respect, but of course a very important one to have, I think, Nadine.
Yeah, that was a great question, Nadine. I hope that answered what you were looking for. Thank you so much, Julie. I have another question here from Pretty. I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Thank you for your question. But she's asking for strategies for having the children to come into the classroom happily, how to comfort with the emotional needs.
I see your question on the screen, so I'm just reading that. Pretty. Yeah. Oh, emotional needs. Definitely. If I'm definitely hoping the bond with you, the relationship with you is evolving, and that would be a really big one. You have to remember, sometimes when children arrive, you're not just getting the school picture. Sometimes there's a lot that happens between leaving home and arriving, right? Sometimes the morning is hard, and sometimes we do need to approach them a little more gently. Time and pressure, if anyone has emotional needs or sensory needs, the minute you put pressure or a time restraint, you're really causing their little nervous system to get completely offline sometimes. It only takes a tiny thing like this. When they line up to come into the classroom, are they just too close to other kids? The proximity is very distressing to some kids, right? Where they take their boots off or their outdoor clothing. Is there an area that's a bit calmer and nurturing for them to kind of do that? The demands we place on students, I don't think we always realize it from the moment they arrive. There's these little demands before you're getting into the heavy learning tasks, right? About ways of being and lining up, and you can't touch your peers, or you may, it depends on the age level, of course, right? Not being able to talk, and carrying bags and things that perhaps usually someone else does for you. All of that is heavy demands on the student, right? And it's, you can't scream and you can't do this. And I think they bring that. So coming in happily, I would always be looking at that lens, not just what can you do? What are we maybe doing that we can change a tiny bit, right? Are your hallways very bright? Is that something that might be distressing? If you're coming in already walking into your classroom, when we talked about classroom culture, but can they walk into dim lighting and blinds being down? Like, natural light's beautiful, but it's very alerting, especially if a little person's coming in and they're already feeling a little on edge, right? Just that, you do nothing, not even talk, and they just walk in to a room that's dimly lit. I can promise you, I was called for a very, very similar consultation in a school, and they said the student would be like a little tornado going from activity to activity and would never sit. And so when I arrived, I sometimes I guess I impose myself, but I went, started pulling all the curtains down. There was a lamp in the corner, wasn't even plugged in, and plugged that in, turned off the overhead lights, and it was very, very dim. And everyone that walked in from the busy hall into the classroom, it was automatically like quiet. And just that, and the student wasn't acting like himself. I know sometimes when we're there, anyone external, it changes things too. But yeah, what power did the physical setting have in that case, right? So I would definitely encourage this educator to play with that a bit. Just take the little tidbits from today and further explore. I know it was so brief. I asked Rebecca if I could talk for 2 hours. I could stay and you just dive in so
we
much.
would love to have you a bit longer. Thank you so much for that question, Pretty. It was a fantastic question, and I loved your response, Julie. I have one more short, quick question, if that's okay. Alexis asked, she has, for her students, they often get excited or distracted when new items are introduced to the classroom. So she gave examples like stationary bike or yoga ball. What's the best way to introduce these things in your opinion, Julie?
I usually do like soft releases, like very gentle. Like, we talk about it a lot before it arrives, and we show photos so they know what it will look like. I try just my inclusive approach, that maybe one specific learner may need this, I offer it to everybody, right? So the routine of like, where will these items be? What will they be used for? Who can access? All of those conversations are rehearsed over and over a lot before even the items come to be. We designate the area where they will be coming, in the area, like, because there's changes, you're changing the predictability of the setting, right? You're making a change. So anything you have to move out of the way should be done even before, right? And then once they're there, I would be modeling a lot what we do with them, and hopefully all of the hype about it is really reduced because you've been talking about it often for 2 weeks before. I hope that helps. I know I'm definitely way too chatty for the time limits imposed today, but I know you all have to get back to something so important, your students, right?
Thank you so much, Julie. I appreciate it. Yes, our time has come to an end. I wanted to say a huge thank you to Julie and Bruce for sharing your expertise and experience with us today. And thank you all for being a part of this wonderful session. Before everyone jumps off, I would like to invite you to leave your thoughts. Please take a moment to provide your feedback in the survey. The link is provided in the chat. You will also receive an email with the survey link shortly thereafter. In addition, I would like to invite you to scan the QR code to explore Saunderly Learning Bites and discover our free valuable resources. The QR code is ready, and you will see it on screen right now. Please do take time to discover our free and incredibly valuable resources. So thank you to everyone, and I hope you all have a wonderful weekend. Bye-bye.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Thank you.